They sold Sidonie for £800. To a duke everyone swore would be dead by winter. But on her wedding night, as Duke Osric Vane raised his glass to toast the bride he never wanted, Sidonie caught the scent rising from his wine. Bitter almonds. Poison. And the only person smiling at that table was his own brother. She had two choices. Stay silent and be a widow by morning, or knock that glass from a dying man's hand and make an enemy of the most dangerous family in England. She chose the glass. If you love stories of forced marriages, hidden enemies, and love that grows where it was never planted, subscribe now, because you do not want to miss what Sidonie does next. But to understand why a merchant's daughter could smell poison in a duke's wine, we have to go back 3 weeks. Back to the night her father gambled away everything they owned, and a black carriage stopped outside their door at midnight. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sidonie Marchbanks knew the smell of every bottle in her father's apothecary shop by heart. She could name laudanum with her eyes closed. She could tell fresh foxglove from old by one breath. Her mother had taught her that before the fever took her, whispering the lessons like bedtime prayers. Poison and medicine are sisters, little bird. The only difference between them is the dose. Now the shop was all Sidonie had left. Her mother was 4 years in the ground, and her father, Ambrose Marchbanks, spent his nights at the gaming tables, trying to drink himself into a man who felt nothing. Sidonie ran the counter alone. She measured tinctures alone. She ate supper alone, listening for his footsteps, learning to read his ruin by the sound of them. Slow steps meant he had lost a little. Silence until dawn meant he had lost everything. That night there was silence. She sat by the dying fire with her mother's herb book open on her lap, not reading it, just holding it, when the knock came. 3 strikes against the door, heavy, certain, the kind of knock that already knew it would be answered. It was past midnight. Decent people did not knock past midnight. Sidonie took the lamp in one hand and, out of old habit, a paring knife in the other, and opened the door. A black carriage stood in the street, lacquered so dark it swallowed the lamplight. No crest on the door. The horses steamed in the cold, like they had been driven hard. And on her step stood a tall man in a grey coat, holding his hat against his chest, the way men do at funerals. "Miss Marchbanks," he said. "Sidonie Marchbanks. Who is asking? My name is Halloran. I am steward to his grace, the Duke of Wrenmoor." He paused, and something in his face flickered. Pity, maybe. Or shame. "Your father is in the carriage." Her stomach dropped. She pushed past him, into the cold, and pulled the carriage door open, and there was Ambrose, slumped against the seat, reeking of brandy, his lips split and crusted dark, alive, weeping. "Papa, Papa, look at me. What happened? Forgive me," he whispered. "Sidonie, forgive me. I only needed one good hand, and I would have won it all back." Won what back? He would not look at her. That was her answer before Halloran ever spoke. "Your father sat down tonight at Corvin Vane's table," the steward said quietly behind her. "He lost the shop. He lost the rooms above it. And when he had nothing left to wager, he wagered his debt against a sum of £800. He lost that too." The street tilted under Sidonie's feet. £800. They could not raise £8. She turned around slowly, the knife still stupid and useless in her fist. "Then Lord Corvin has come to take the shop," she said. "Fine. Take it. Take the shelves and the bottles and the sign over the door. He cannot take what we do not have. Lord Corvin is not the one who holds the debt anymore." Halloran's jaw tightened. His Grace bought it from his brother an hour ago. Every shilling of it. Why would a duke buy a poor man's gambling debt? "Because his Grace is dying, Miss Marchbanks." The words sat in the cold air between them. Somewhere down the street, A dog barked and went quiet. The physicians give him until winter, Halloran went on. Some say sooner. He has no wife, no heir, and a brother circling the estate like a crow. When he heard Corvin boasting about ruining an apothecary's daughter, he asked her name, and when he heard whose daughter you were, he stood up from his chair, which he has not done in a fortnight, and told me to ready the carriage. Sidonie's mouth went dry. I have never met the Duke of Wrenmoor in my life. No, Halloran said, but he met your mother. The knife nearly slipped from her hand. My mother has been dead 4 years. 20 years ago, before your mother married, she was called to Wrenmoor Hall in the middle of the night. A young lord had been poisoned and every physician in the county had given him up. She did not give him up. His Grace has carried that debt longer than you have been alive. Halloran drew a breath. He says a Marchbanks saved his life once. Now he means to save one in return. But he asks something in exchange. What could a dying duke possibly want from me? Marriage. For a moment, Sidonie was sure she had misheard. Then she laughed. One sharp, broken sound. Because the only other choice was to scream. He is mad. He is dying, Halloran said, which is close enough. Hear the terms before you refuse. You marry his Grace within the month. You live at Wrenmoor Hall as his Duchess. When he passes, the debt dies with him. Your father keeps his shop, and you keep the widow's portion. Enough that no man ever owns you again. He hesitated, and his voice dropped low. And there is one more thing. His Grace believes his illness is not illness at all. He believes someone in that house is killing him slowly. He needs a wife with your mother's gift, a wife who knows poison when she sees it, or smells it. Behind her, in the carriage, her father sobbed into his hands. In front of her stood a stranger offering to buy her life for £800 and a dead woman's memory. And if I say no, then the debt stands. Your father goes to the sponging house by Friday, and I suspect he will not survive it. And his Grace will be dead by Christmas, and no one will ever ask why. Halloran put his hat back on and stepped toward the carriage. You have until sunrise to decide, but I will tell you this, miss, because you seem the kind who prefers truth. Whatever is killing the Duke of Wrenmoor, it started the same month his brother came home. And Lord Corvin ruined your father at cards tonight for a reason. I do not believe it was chance. He climbed up beside the driver and left her standing in the frozen street with a knife, a weeping father, and a question that would not let her breathe. Because if Corvin Vane had ruined them on purpose, then he had wanted Sidonie desperate. He had wanted her right here, right now, with nowhere to run but Wrenmoor Hall. The question was why? What did the Crow of Wrenmoor want with an apothecary's daughter who knew every poison in England by its smell? By sunrise, she would give her answer, and by the next full moon, she would be standing at an altar, watching a dying man raise a glass of poisoned wine. But first, she had to survive her first night inside Wrenmoor Hall, a house where the servants would not meet her eyes, a house where doors locked from the outside, a house where, on her very first morning, she would find a warning scratched into the frost of her window. So tell me, do you think the Duke bought Sidonie out of guilt, or does he know something about her mother's death that she doesn't? Drop your answer in the comments, and make sure you are subscribed with the bell turned on, because in the next part, Sidonie walks into Wrenmoor Hall and comes face to face with the man who ruined her father, and Corvin Vane is about to make her an offer far more dangerous than marriage. Sidonie did not sleep. She sat at the shop counter until the sky turned grey, her mother's herb book pressed to her chest, and when the black carriage returned at sunrise, she was standing in the doorway wearing her best dress, which was not good, and her mother's silver locket, which was everything. She did not say goodbye to her father. He was still drunk. She told herself that was the reason, and knew it was a lie. The truth was, she could not look at him without hating him, and she did not want hatred to be the last thing between them, if this house killed her too. Wrenmoor Hall rose out of the morning fog, like something that had drowned and been dragged back up. Grey stone, black windows, ivy strangling the east wing. Beautiful the way a shipwreck is beautiful. As the carriage rolled through the gates, Sidonie counted the chimneys and stopped at 20, and thought, people go missing in houses this size, and no one ever finds the room it happened in. Halloran met her at the steps. Behind him, a line of servants stood in the cold, and not one of them looked at her face. They looked at her shoes, her hands, the ground. A maid at the end of the row was trembling, and it was not from the wind. His Grace will receive you in the west study, Halloran said. I must prepare you. He is not what he was. I never knew what he was. No, Halloran said quietly. That may be a mercy. The house swallowed her. Corridors of dark wood, portraits with eyes gone black from smoke, and cold, a strange deliberate cold, as if the fires were kept low on purpose. She smelled beeswax and dust, and underneath it something else, something faint and sweetish that made the hair on her arms rise. She had smelled it before, in sick rooms, in the rooms of people who did not get better. Then a voice came from a doorway to her left, warm as oil. So this is the little apothecary. He stepped into the corridor, and she knew him at once, though she had never seen him. Corvin Vane. He was beautiful. That was the horrible thing. Golden-haired, easy-shouldered, with the kind of smile that opened doors and emptied purses. The man who had ruined her father looked like an angel painted on a church ceiling. Lord Corvin, she said, and did not curtsy. His smile widened, as if her rudeness delighted him. You have your mother's eyes. Did anyone ever tell you that? No. How could they? No one here speaks of your mother any more. He came closer, lowering his voice like they were old friends sharing a secret. Let me spare you weeks of confusion, Miss Marchbanks. My brother is dying. Nothing on God's earth can stop it. Whatever bargain he offers you today, understand that you are not being made a duchess. You are being made a nurse for a corpse, and when he is gone, this house is mine, and I have a very long memory for people who were unkind to me. Is that a threat, my lord? It is arithmetic. He plucked a thread from her sleeve, gently, intimately, and she forced herself not to flinch. £800 is a great deal of money. I could tear up your father's markers this morning. You could go home. All I would ask in return is that whatever you see in this house, whatever you smell in this house, you keep to yourself. His eyes were very blue and very empty. My brother imagines conspiracies. Dying men do. It would be cruel of you to encourage him. There it was. Halloran had been right. She had been ruined on purpose, herded here like a lamb through a gate, and now the wolf was offering to open the gate again if she would only go quietly. Thank you, my lord, Sidonie said, but I was invited by the Duke. It would be rude to leave without seeing him. Something moved behind Corvin's eyes, fast and cold, gone in a blink. Of course, he said pleasantly. Do give him my love. The west study smelled of wood smoke and wintergreen, and by the tall window, in a chair built for a bigger man, sat the Duke of Wrenmoor. Osric Vane had been handsome once. She could see the ruins of it. Dark hair gone early to grey at the temples, a jaw made for portraits, shoulders that had carried a uniform. But his skin had a waxen cast, his lips were dry and pale, and his hands, resting on a cane, trembled in a slow rhythm he could not hide. He was perhaps 35. He looked 60, and his eyes, when they found her, were the only living things in his face, dark and quick and furious with intelligence. You came, he said. His voice was low gravel. I told Halloran you would not. You bought my father's debt, your grace. I did not come. I was purchased. She heard Halloran inhale sharply by the door, but the Duke did not rage. He studied her a long moment, and then something like approval crossed his ruined face. Good, he said. You are angry. Anger is honest. I have had enough of smiles in this house to last the little time I have left. He gestured to the chair opposite. Sit. I will not waste your morning with courtship. I am told I do not have the months to spare. She sat. Up close, the sweetish smell was stronger, coming off his skin, his breath. Her mind was already working through her mother's lessons, turning pages in the herb book without meaning to. Halloran gave you the terms, he said. Marriage. The debt forgiven. Your father's shop returned. A widow's portion when I am gone. £3,000. No conditions. In exchange, you live here as my wife until I die. He paused. I expect that will not inconvenience you long. Why marriage? She asked. You could hire me. A nurse, a taster, an apothecary. Marriage is a cage, with a crest on it. Because a servant can be dismissed, Osric said. The moment I am too weak to protect you, my brother would have you out that gate by nightfall, or worse. A wife cannot be dismissed. A duchess cannot be turned away from her husband's sickbed, her husband's kitchen, her husband's wine cellar. Marriage is not the cage, Miss Marchbanks. Marriage is the key. It is the only door in this house Corvin cannot lock. And what am I in this arrangement, truly? He leaned forward, and his voice dropped to almost nothing. You are the only person within 50 miles I have no reason to suspect. Every soul in this house was here when I began to sicken. Every physician has been paid or frightened. You owe nothing to anyone at Wrenmoor, except a debt that I hold, and dead men collect no debts. His dark eyes held hers. Someone is killing me slowly, and they are clever, and I am running out of blood to be clever with. Find what it is. Find who. I do not ask you to save me. I ask you to make sure that when I die, it is God's doing, and not my brother's. The fire cracked. Somewhere above them, a floorboard groaned, then went still, and Sidonie thought of the trembling maid, the locked doors, the servants who would not look up. I have conditions, she said. Name them. My father never learns why I married you. He will think I did it for the money. Let him. Her throat tightened. Second, I go where I please in this house. Kitchens, cellars, sick room, all of it. No locked doors. Third, if I find your poisoner, you do not take it to your grave in silence. You take it to a magistrate. I will not be a widow in a murderer's house. Osric Vane looked at her for a long time, and then, for one moment, the ghost of the man he had been surfaced, and he almost smiled. Halloran, he said. Send for the parson. Post the banns. He extended one trembling hand toward her, formal as a treaty. We are agreed, Duchess. She took his hand. It was cold as riverstone, and as their hands met, Sidonie caught the sweetish smell again, stronger now, and this time her mind found the page. Her mother's handwriting swam up from memory, and her blood went colder than his fingers, because if she was right about that smell, the poison was not in his food or his wine at all. It was somewhere no taster would ever find it. Somewhere he touched every single day. They were married on a Tuesday, in the cold chapel at Wrenmoor, with rain against the windows and Corvin Vane smiling in the front pew like a man watching a play he had written himself. There was no wedding breakfast worth the name. Osric could not stand long enough for toasts, and Sidonie did not want them. When the parson left, her husband looked at her across the empty chapel and said, Well, Duchess, try not to grieve too long. And she surprised them both by answering, I will schedule my grief around my work, and something that was almost a laugh scraped out of him before the coughing took it. That was the first day. By the third day, she understood the shape of her new life. They shared a wing, but not a table, because Osric ate almost nothing and hated to be watched failing at it. They shared a name, but not a history, because every time she asked about her mother's night at Wrenmoor 20 years ago, his face closed like a door. And they shared an enemy, though neither of them had said Corvin's name out loud since the wedding, because in that house the walls did not just have ears, they had loyalties. So Sidonie worked. She rose before the servants and walked the kitchens while the ovens were still cold. She smelled the flour, the tea, the sugar, the salt. She marked the wine bottles with a needle scratch under the wax, so she would know if one was switched. She watched the Duke's tray assembled and carried it up herself, and ate a spoonful from every dish in front of the cook, a broad, silent woman named Mrs. Quill, whose hands never stopped moving and whose eyes never stopped watching. Nothing. Day after day, nothing. The food was clean, the wine was clean, and still, every morning, Osric Vane was a little greyer, a little slower, the tremor in his hands a little wider. Whatever was killing him walked past her defences like they were fog. The sweetish smell haunted her. She caught it strongest in his study, in his bedchamber, on his skin, and her mother's book had a name for it that she was not ready to say out loud, because the poison it belonged to did not need to be eaten at all. It could soak through skin, through cloth, through anything a man touched, day after day, year after year if you were patient. And Corvin Vane was nothing if not patient. She started small and quiet. She replaced the candles in Osric's rooms, saying the old ones smoked. She had his bed linens boiled, saying the laundry maid had been careless. She took away his snuff-box, and when he protested, she said, "You may have it back when I have licked every grain of it myself, your grace. Is that what you want?" And he stared at her, this small, furious woman, confiscating a duke's snuff, and let it go. They fell into a rhythm, neither of them named. Evenings, she sat in his study with her mother's book while he worked through estate papers his hands could barely hold. The first night she came, he said, "I did not send for you." She said, "I know," and kept reading. The second night, he had a chair moved nearer the fire. Neither of them mentioned it. By the sixth night, he had begun, without looking up, to pass her papers. His eyes were too tired to finish, and she read the figures aloud while he listened with his eyes shut, and the fire cracked, and the house groaned around them like a ship, and it was not peace, but it was the nearest thing to it either of them had known in years. She learned him in small pieces, sideways, the way you learn a wary animal. He had been a soldier, and his cane had a sword hidden in it, and once when his hands shook too badly to hold his pen, he threw it across the room, with such sudden violence that she froze, and he sat there breathing hard, ashamed, and said very quietly, "I used to write 4 hands, dispatches all night. I had the steadiest hands in the regiment." She picked up the pen, and set it back on the desk, and said, "Then dictate. My hands are steady, and my spelling is better than yours anyway." And after a long moment, he began to speak, and she began to write. And that was how the Duke of Wrenmoor's letters came to be written in his wife's hand. He learned her too. She caught him at it. He noticed that she ate her supper standing up in the kitchen like a servant, until the day he had a second place laid in his study without a word. He noticed that she touched her silver locket when she lied, and told her so, and she stopped wearing it on days she planned to lie to Corvin. He noticed the way she flinched when brandy was poured near her, and did not ask why, and she was grateful, because the answer was her father, and she was not ready to hand him that piece of herself. Corvin watched it all, with his beautiful empty smile. He came to dinner twice a week, uninvited, and performed the loving brother so well that Sidonie began to doubt her own certainty. He kissed her hand. He told stories of Osric as a boy that made even Osric's mouth twitch. And once, passing her in the corridor, he paused and said softly, without a trace of the smile, "You moved his candles." Interesting, and was gone before her heart restarted. That night she sat across from her husband and said, "He knows I am looking." "Good," Osric said. "A man who knows he is watched makes mistakes. Or hurries." The word sat between them, ugly and true. Osric set down the paper he could not read anyway, and looked at her. Really looked, the firelight moving in his dark eyes. "Why do you touch the locket?" he asked. "When we speak of your mother." Her hand was at her throat. She had not felt herself do it. She made herself lower it. "Because she is all I have that no one can take. Because everything I know, she put in me. And this house took something from her that she never spoke of." Sidonie leaned forward. "She came here 20 years ago and saved a poisoned boy. That boy was you. You know what happened that night, and you will not tell me, and I am your wife, and I am fighting the same poisoner in the same house. What are you protecting me from?" For a moment she thought he would tell her. His mouth opened. His hand moved on the cane. Then, from the floor above them, a door slammed. They both went still. It was past midnight. The servants' wing was on the other side of the house. Above the study, there was nothing but the old east wing, the drowned wing, closed these 20 years, its windows black behind the ivy. "Halloran locks the east wing," Osric said slowly. "It has been locked since before my father died." Footsteps crossed the ceiling, unhurried, heavy, a man's stride, moving through rooms that were supposed to hold nothing but dust sheets and dead furniture, and then the sound of something dragging, something with weight, across the floor directly over their heads. Sidonie was on her feet. Osric caught her wrist, and his grip was stronger than a dying man's had any right to be. "No, someone is in this house, above your head, at midnight, and you say no. I say not alone." He pulled himself up on the cane, and there was iron in his ruined face, the soldier surfacing through the sickness. He twisted the cane's handle, and 6 inches of steel showed at the seam. "The east wing has one staircase. Whoever it is must come down it." They stood in the dark of the corridor together, the dying Duke and the apothecary's daughter, watching the door to the east wing stairs. Her heart was so loud she was sure it would give them away. Beside her, Osric breathed slow and even, an old skill from old wars. And despite everything, despite the fear, some traitorous part of her noticed that this was the closest they had ever stood, close enough that she could feel the fever heat coming off him, and that when the dragging sound came again, nearer now, on the stairs themselves, he moved himself between her and the door, without seeming to think about it at all. A dying man, shielding her with the only body he had left. The footsteps came down, the door handle turned, and the door swung open on a figure holding a shuttered lantern, and the light came up, and Sidonie looked into a face she knew. Not Corvin, Mrs. Quill, the silent cook, standing in the doorway of a wing locked for 20 years, with rust-coloured dust on her apron and a key in her fist. And behind her on the stairs, half wrapped in a dust sheet, was the thing she had been dragging, a painting, a portrait, taller than a man, its face slashed from crown to chin, and even ruined, even by lantern light. Sidonie knew the woman in it. She was wearing Sidonie's silver locket. The lantern shook in Mrs. Quill's fist, and for one long moment nobody in that corridor breathed. Then the cook did the last thing Sidonie expected. She set the lantern down, straightened her spine, and looked the Duke of Wrenmoor dead in the eye, the first servant in that house Sidonie had ever seen do it. "You should be in bed, your grace," she said, "and you should not have brought her to this door. You are in my locked wing at midnight with a slashed portrait," Osric said, the sword still bare in his hand. "You will explain, Mrs. Quill, or you will explain to a magistrate." "A magistrate?" The cook made a sound that was almost a laugh, old and bitter as ash. "There was a magistrate here 20 years ago, your grace. Your father bought him a new roof. Ask your wife's mother what magistrates are worth at Wrenmoor." Her eyes moved to Sidonie, and something in them cracked open. "God forgive me, girl. You have her face. I have been feeding you for 3 weeks, and I could hardly stand to look at you." Sidonie stepped past her husband's arm. Up close the portrait was worse. The slash had been made with force, again and again, but the locket in the painting was unmistakable. Silver, oval, the tiny wren engraved on its face. The same locket that lay at that moment against Sidonie's own skin. Who is she? Her name was Elowyn Vane. Mrs. Quill's voice dropped to almost nothing. The old Duke's second wife, your husband's stepmother, Corvin's mother. She paused, and the next words came out like stones. And your mother's dearest friend in this world. That locket you wear, girl. Elowyn gave it to her. There were two made, one for each of them. The floor seemed to move under Sidonie's feet. My mother never spoke of any Elowyn, never spoke of this house at all. No, she swore she never would, and your mother kept her oaths. Mrs. Quill looked at Osric then, and her jaw trembled. You were 17, your Grace. You remember the night you sickened. Do you remember what else happened that same winter? Osric had gone very still, the sword point lowered slowly toward the floor. Elowyn died, he said. A fever. 3 months after I recovered. A fever. Mrs. Quill repeated it the way you repeat a lie you have carried too long. Your Grace, the night Miss Marchbanks's mother saved your life, she found the poison. She found where it came from. And she told one person. She told Elowyn, because Elowyn was her friend, and the boy's stepmother, and she trusted her to protect you. The old woman's hands closed on her apron. 3 months later, Elowyn was dead of a fever. No one else in the house caught. The portrait was slashed and ordered burned, and every servant was told her name was not to be spoken again. I could not burn it. God help me, I could not. I have moved it from hiding place to hiding place for 20 years, and tonight I moved it because someone has been in the east wing. Things disturbed. Dust walked through. Someone is searching this wing, your Grace, and I think we both know what they are searching for. What did my mother find? Sidonie whispered. What did she tell Elowyn? I do not know. That secret died with them both. Mrs. Quill picked up the lantern, and her face in its light was old and frightened and fierce all at once. But I know this. Your mother left this house at dawn, and never came back, and she was not the same woman after. And whoever poisoned a 17-year-old boy 20 years ago is still under this roof, still patient, and has learned to be slower. And now that man's brother has married the poison finder's daughter. She looked between them. You did not bring a wife into this house, your Grace. You brought a loaded gun, and the whole county knows it. They did not sleep that night. They sat in the study until grey light, the slashed portrait propped against the wall between them like a third person, and Osric told her what he remembered of Elowyn, a laughing woman who had made his cold father almost human, and Sidonie told him what she remembered of her mother, the lessons, the silences, the way she would sometimes hold the locket and stare at nothing. 2 children of the same buried crime, comparing wounds. It was the most either of them had ever given the other, and it was interrupted at 9 in the morning by the sound of carriages, 3 of them crunching up the gravel in a line, and Corvin Vane riding ahead on a grey horse like a herald. Sidonie watched from the window as the doors opened and men climbed out, and her stomach turned to ice because she knew the type on sight. Black coats, leather cases, the particular self-importance of men who ruin lives with paper. Halloran came in white-faced. Your Grace, your brother, with Dr. Pettigrew of London, a Sir Mordecai Slane, Commissioner of Lunacy, and a lawyer from Chancery. Lunacy, Sidonie repeated. The word did not make sense, and then all at once it did, and the ice reached her heart. They assembled in the great hall because Corvin wanted an audience of servants, and he got one. He stood by the fire in riding clothes, warm and golden and sorrowful, and he performed grief so beautifully that Sidonie wanted to be sick. Brother, he said, this gives me no pleasure, but it has gone too far, and I love you too well to watch it. You are ill. Your mind is failing with your body. You see poisoners in every shadow. You interrogate your own cook at midnight with a drawn blade. Yes, the servants talk. They are frightened of you. And in your confusion you have been preyed upon. His blue eyes came to Sidonie, and they were wet, actually wet. The monster could cry on command. A tradesman's daughter, bought with a gambling debt, married inside a month, given the run of the house, the keys, the cellars, the sick room. A woman whose entire skill is poison. Brother, since she entered this house, have you grown better or worse? The hall was silent. Sidonie felt the servant's eyes crawl over her, and understood with horrible clarity how it looked from outside. Every protection Osric had built for her, Corvin had just turned into a noose. Sir Mordecai carries a petition, Corvin went on gently. An inquiry into your competence. If the commission finds your mind unsound, your affairs pass to your nearest male relation, and your recent marriage, contracted under undue influence during incapacity, is voidable. The lady returns to her father with the debt restored. He spread his hands. Or brother, we can avoid all of it. Send her away today. Sign the guardianship quietly. I will care for you to the end, in comfort and dignity, and no court need ever hear the word lunatic beside the name Vane. There it was, not a knife in the dark, a cage of law, built in daylight, with doctors for bars. Sidonie's pulse was a war drum, but she kept her hands folded, her face smooth. She was a duchess, for as long as this marriage stood, and duchesses did not tremble in front of servants. Beside her, she felt Osric gather himself, and when she glanced at him, her breath caught, because the sick man was gone. What stood there, leaning on the sword cane, was the soldier, grey and dying and utterly unafraid. Dr. Pettigrew, Osric said pleasantly, Sir Mordecai, you have travelled far on my brother's coin, so hear me clearly. I will submit to your inquiry. Examine me all you wish. But mark what you have witnessed today, gentlemen, and mark it well. A younger brother stands to inherit everything upon a verdict of unsoundness, and it was he who paid your fees, chose your carriages, and rehearsed your entrances. He took one step forward, and the tremor in his hand had, for that one moment, gone entirely still. And touch my wife's position in this house, any of you, and you will discover that a man needs neither sanity nor health to name his brother in a sworn deposition before a crown prosecutor. I have one drafted. Halloran has instructions. If I die, it is opened. If I am declared unsound, it is opened. Wager carefully. Corvin's smile did not move, but something behind it did, and for a heartbeat, Sidonie saw straight down into him, and there was nothing there but winter. 14 days, brother, he said softly. The commission sits in 14 days. I do hope your health holds. His eyes slid to Sidonie, and he bowed. Duchess, do take care what you touch. That night, Osric collapsed on the study floor. Not slowly, not the usual weary fading. One moment he was standing at the window, the next his legs went, and Sidonie caught him, both of them going down together, and his lips were grey, and his pulse was flying and stumbling, and on his breath the sweetish smell was suddenly, violently strong. 14 days had been a lie. Corvin was not going to wait for any commission. The dose had just gone up, and as Sidonie shouted for Halloran, and pressed her fingers to her husband's throat, counting the broken rhythm of his heart, her eyes fell on the one thing in the room that was new, the one thing that had entered the study that very evening, and everything inside her went quiet, and cold, and certain. The new thing in the room was the petition, Sir Mordecai's lunacy petition, thick cream paper, folded in 3, delivered into Osric's own hands that evening, because the law required he receive it personally. He had read it twice by candlelight. He had turned every page. His fingers had been on that paper for the better part of an hour, and Corvin's parting words came back to Sidonie like a blade sliding home. "Do take care what you touch," he had told her. He had stood in her own hall and told her to her face, because that was Corvin's vice. He could not resist being clever out loud. "Gloves," she snapped at Halloran as he came running. "Do not touch those papers with bare skin. Not you, not anyone. Get them in a box and lock it. They are evidence now." Then she went to work on her husband, and the next hour was the longest of her life. She stripped his coat and scrubbed his hands raw with soap and spirits. She burned the sleeves. She forced warm salted water into him until he retched, kept his feet raised, counted the mad gallop of his pulse against her own steady one, and refused to let her hands shake. Her mother's voice moved through her the whole time, calm as church. "Wolfsbane, little bird, the queen of poisons. It does not need your mouth. It only needs your skin, and time. Numbness first, then the heart stumbles like a drunkard on stairs. Aconite, monkshood, wolfsbane, ground fine and worked into a wax polish, painted thin on paper, on the leather of his chair, on the ivory head of the old cane he had used for years, before the sword cane, on 100 surfaces a man touches without thinking. That was the sweetish ghost she had been smelling for weeks. Not in his food, never in his food, in his world. Corvin had turned the whole house into a slow weapon, and tonight, with 14 days suddenly too long to wait, he had sent a lethal dose through a legal document, so that the Duke of Wrenmoor would die holding the very papers that called him mad. It was almost beautiful. It was the cruelest thing she had ever seen. By dawn, Osric's heart had steadied to something like rhythm. He surfaced near noon, grey-lipped, eyes sunken, and the first thing he said, in a voice like dragged gravel, was, "The papers, locked away, with your deposition." She was grinding charcoal at his bedside table, her sleeves rolled, her hair fallen loose, past caring. It was never in the food. It is wolfsbane, worked into things you touch. I know how, I can prove what, but I cannot yet prove who. His hands never carry anything. He has someone inside this house, doing the polishing, the painting, the placing. Osric was silent a long moment. Then, quietly, "You saved my life. I lowered your dose." She met his eyes. "You have been poisoned for over a year. Your heart is worn like old rope. Even if I stop every grain of it from this hour, I do not know how much of you comes back. I will not lie to you, not you." Something passed over his ruined face, and it took her a moment to recognize it, because she had never seen it there before. "Peace. Everyone in this house has lied to me for 20 years, he said. "My wife tells me I may die anyway, and it is the kindest thing anyone has said to me since my mother died." His hand found hers on the coverlet, cold fingers over stained ones. 14 days, Sidonie. Help me live 14 days, long enough to stand in front of that commission with a steady voice and bury him in the light, where everyone can see. They never got 14 days. They got 2. The fire began on the second night, and it began in the east wing. Sidonie woke to the smell before the shouting, smoke with something wrong underneath it, lamp oil, and she was in the corridor barefoot before her mind caught up with her body. Orange light shivered against the windows at the end of the hall. The east wing, locked for 20 years, dust and dry timber and dead furniture, was burning like a torch, and the wind was carrying it toward the main house, toward the servants' attics above, toward Osric's rooms below. The next minutes were chaos, and she moved through them like a woman in a flood. She beat on doors. She dragged the little trembling scullery maid out by the wrist. She met Halloran on the stairs, organizing a bucket line that both of them knew was a prayer, not a plan, and she was turning back for Osric when she saw, through the smoke, at the mouth of the burning wing, a figure going in. "Mrs. Quill! Going into the fire!" Because the portrait was in there, and the portrait was the only proof on earth that Elowyn Vane had ever lived, and the old woman had guarded it for 20 years and could not stop now. Sidonie did not decide. Her feet decided. She was through the door into the heat before anyone could catch her, into a world with no air, only smoke and roar and the terrible bright breathing of the fire ahead. She found Mrs. Quill at the foot of the stairs, coughing, wrestling the huge slashed canvas that was too heavy for her, that had always been too heavy for her, and Sidonie got under the other end, and together they hauled it, two women dragging a dead duchess out of the flames that had been set to erase her. The ceiling above the stairs came down behind them in a waterfall of sparks. The heat shoved them out the door like a hand, and there in the courtyard, in the mad orange light, stood Osric. Out of his sickbed, on his feet, the sword cane in one fist, and when he saw Sidonie come out of that burning door alive, soot black, hauling the portrait, something in his face broke open that she would remember the rest of her life. He crossed the yard like the dying man he was, and he took her face in both trembling hands, and in front of God, the fire, and every servant at Wrenmoor, the Duke said, "Never again, do you hear me? I have lost every person I ever," and his voice failed, and he could not finish it, and he did not need to. She put her blackened hands over his, and finished it for him. "You have not lost this one." The east wing burned until dawn. They saved the main house. They did not save everything, because in the grey morning light, when the counting was done, one person did not answer. They found the little scullery maid, the trembling one, the one Sidonie had pulled from her bed with her own hands, at the far edge of the gardens by the broken wall. Not burned, not touched by fire at all, cold and still in the wet grass with a spilled bottle of lamp oil a few feet away, and her neck marked by hands. She had not set the fire and fled. She had set the fire because someone made her, and then that someone had made sure she could never say who. The courtyard went silent, the kind of silence that comes after everything, when there is nothing left to shout at. Sidonie stood over the small body in the dawn cold, and beside her Osric leaned on his cane, and Mrs. Quill wept without sound into her burned apron. And across the yard, at the window of his untouched rooms in the west wing, stood Corvin Vane in his dressing gown, watching the smoke rise with a cup of chocolate in his hand. He raised the cup to Sidonie. Half an inch, a toast. She did not look away, and in that long moment across the ruined courtyard, something in her finished changing. The fear did not leave, it simply stopped mattering. That evening, alone, she and Mrs. Quill laid the rescued portrait flat and cut away the scorched backing to save the canvas, and that was when Sidonie's knife found it. A hard shape, small and flat, sewn into the lining behind Elowyn's painted heart, hidden there 20 years. She worked it free with shaking fingers. A locket, silver, oval, a wren engraved on its face, the twin of the one around Sidonie's own neck. Elowyn's locket, hidden by someone inside her own portrait in the weeks before she died. And when Sidonie pressed the clasp, it opened on no portrait, no keepsake, but a tiny iron key, old and toothed and cold, and pressed into the velvet beneath it, a single dried sprig of a plant Sidonie knew on sight better than her own reflection. Wolfsbane. Elowyn had known. 20 years ago, before she died of a fever no one else caught, Elowyn Vane had known exactly what was in this house, and she had left behind a key. The question that kept Sidonie awake until sunrise was simple and terrible. A key to what? The key kept Sidonie awake until sunrise, and at sunrise Mrs. Quill answered the question no one had asked out loud. Elowyn had a still room, the old cook said quietly, over the ruins of breakfast in the smoke-stained kitchen. Her own. The old Duke had it built for her under the chapel, because she liked to make her rose waters and her remedies in peace. After she died, it was bricked over. I always thought that strange. You do not brick up a room for grief. You brick up a room to bury something. They went down that same morning, the three of them. Osric leaning on Halloran's arm down the chapel stairs, Sidonie carrying the lamp. Behind the wine racks in the undercroft, under 20 years of whitewash, the outline of a door still showed if you knew to look. It took Halloran an hour with a bar to open the brickwork, and behind it stood a low oak door with an iron lock, and the key from the locket turned in it like it had been waiting. The still room was small and dry and perfectly preserved, a tomb of copper and glass. Bundles of herbs gone to dust on their hooks. Elowyn's aprons still folded on the shelf, and on the workbench, weighted under a marble mortar, a leather journal, and beside it a wooden box with a wax seal pressed with a wren. Sidonie's hands did not shake until she opened the journal and saw two different hands on the pages, one elegant and looping, one small, neat, upright, and known to her the way her own heartbeat was known to her, her mother's handwriting. She read for an hour, out loud when her voice allowed it, silent when it did not, while Osric sat on Elowyn's old stool and listened to 20 years of his life be rewritten. The truth was this. The night the young lord was poisoned, Sidonie's mother had found wolfsbane worked into wax on the boy's belongings, and she had told Elowyn. But the two women had made a mistake. They assumed the poisoner was a servant, some hired hand, and they set a quiet trap to catch him. They noted which rooms, which objects, which weeks. They wrote it all down in this book, and the evidence, entry after entry, date after date, led them somewhere neither of them could bear at first to believe. The poison appeared only in the school holidays, only when one particular person was home from Harrow, Corvin Vane, 15 years old, poisoning his half-brother for the inheritance, patiently, cleverly, at 15. Elowyn had confronted her own son. It was the last entry in her hand, and it was a mother's handwriting falling apart on the page. He did not deny it. He smiled at me. My child smiled at me, and I saw that there is a room in him with nothing in it. I have sealed the proofs. If I sicken, if I fail, the wren keeps my secrets until someone comes who can read them. 3 months later, she was dead of a fever, no one else caught. The portrait was slashed, and Sidonie's mother, the only living soul who knew, went home, took off her locket, and never spoke the name Wrenmoor again, not out of fear for herself. The journal's final loose page, in her mother's hand, dated years later, said only this: "He knows I know. He has made it clear my silence buys my daughter's safety. God forgive me, I choose my child. I teach her everything, and I pray she never needs it." Sidonie sat down on the cold floor of the still room, holding proof that every lesson of her childhood, every herb, every smell, every drill, had been her mother arming a weapon against this exact house and this exact man, and she wept, and Osric slid down off the stool with his ruined knees to sit beside her on the stones, and held her, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and it was exactly enough. In the box under the wax seal were the proofs Elowyn had promised. Samples in glass, dated, labelled, and letters, one in the old Duke's own hand, confirming he too had begun to suspect his younger son before his death. "It reaches back 20 years, Osric said quietly. 2 deaths, likely 3 with the maid. Attempted murder of a peer, twice over. It is enough, Sidonie. It is finally enough." They did not give Corvin 14 days. They did not give him 2. The Commission of Lunacy sat as scheduled, because Osric insisted, and it was the trap. Corvin arrived golden and sorrowful with his bought doctors, prepared to bury his brother in paper, and found instead a Crown prosecutor, a magistrate from London with no roof, bought by any Vane. Sir Mordecai gone pale and cooperative to save his own neck, and on the long table, laid out like a body, 20 years of evidence. The journal in 2 hands. Elowyn's sealed proofs. The petition papers, tested by 2 chemists, dosed with enough aconite to stop a horse. Mrs. Quill's testimony. Halloran's, and a duchess in grey silk, who stood and explained, in the plain, clear voice of an apothecary's daughter, exactly how you kill a man through his skin over 18 months, and exactly how you catch it. Corvin listened to all of it with his beautiful smile, and it held almost to the end. It broke only once, at the very last, when Sidonie lifted the second locket, Elowin's locket, and set it on the table facing him, and said, "Your mother left this for us. She caught you first. We only finished her sentence." For one heartbeat, the room with nothing in it looked out through his eyes at all of them. Then the constables took him, and the Vane name went into the newspapers, and the county that had whispered about the mad duke and his poison bride learned, all at once, exactly who had been mad and who had been poison. He would not hang, in the end. Men with his name rarely did. But the convict transport that carried him from England sailed in November, and Wrenmoor Hall did not send anyone to see it off. The strange thing was what came after. Sidonie had braced all her life for battles, and no one had ever taught her what to do with peace. Winter came, the winter Osric was supposed to die in. He did not die. He did not entirely recover either. Her honesty on that had been sound. His heart stayed worn. His left hand kept a small tremor, and stares would tax him all his days. But week by poison-free week, colour came back. Appetite came back. He put on weight and temper, and began terrorizing the estate stewards over drainage and tenant roofs. And one morning in January, Sidonie realized she had heard him laugh 3 times in a single day, and had stopped counting. They rebuilt the east wing with windows twice the old size, because Osric said the house had held enough darkness for 1 century. Elowin's portrait was repaired by a man from London and hung at the head of the stairs, the slash mended into a faint silver scar she had earned. Mrs. Quill ruled the new kitchens like a bishop. Ambrose Marchbanks got his shop back, and, more slowly, his daughter, one careful Sunday dinner at a time, and if he never learned the whole truth of that year, he learned enough to stay away from cards. The still room under the chapel was Sidonie's now. She worked there most mornings, her mother's book and Elowin's journal side by side on the bench, making medicines for half the county, and most mornings, at some point, uneven footsteps and a cane would come down the chapel stairs, and Osric would take the stool in the corner that had somehow become his, and read his correspondence out loud while she worked, and complain about Parliament, and steal dried apple slices from her jars like a boy. That was where the confession happened, when it finally did. Not on a battlefield, not over a deathbed. On an ordinary Tuesday in spring, rain on the chapel windows above, her hands stained green with comfrey, him reading a dull letter from a dull cousin, and he simply stopped in the middle of a sentence, and she looked up, and he was watching her the way he had watched her come out of the fire. "I was ready to die, you know," he said. "That was the bargain I thought I was making. A watchdog for my last winter. I never once planned for this." "For what?" "For wanting 100 more of them." Sidonie set down the pestle. She crossed the little room that 2 dead women had built and guarded for her, and she took his face in her green-stained hands. This stubborn, scarred, impossible man she had been sold to for £800. And she said, "Then we had better not waste this one," and kissed him, and upstairs the rain went on falling on Wrenmoor, as if the house itself had exhaled. They were sold to each other by debt, bound by poison, and kept by choice. Her mother's last prayer had been answered backwards. Sidonie had needed everything she was taught, every leaf and grain of it, and it had not destroyed her. It had brought her home. And that is the end of Sidonie and Osric's story. So tell me, what moment hit you hardest? The fire, the still room, or the 2 lockets finally side by side? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one, and your theories along the way have been incredible. If this story touched you, do me one kindness. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because next week I am bringing you a brand new story, a governess who arrives at a manor by the sea and discovers her new employer buried his first wife twice. Yes, twice. You do not want to miss it. Until then, take care of each other, and remember, the quietest women are usually the ones who know exactly where the poison is.